So we're going to jump right in with our next guest, who is Shane Claiborne. And I have to admit, Shane, when I saw your name, I immediately went and looked you up. But Shane is an author, an activist, co-director of Red Letter Christians. And so, Shane, let's get right into this. Thank you again for coming today, joining us. So you are an advocate. Yes, sir. You are an advocate for nonviolence. And the other day you tweeted about Gandhi and being love. And of course, Gandhi said that we have to be the change that we want to see. So how does this particular belief system show up in terms, how does it show up in your work? How does it guide your work, especially when we're talking about criminal justice reform and addressing issues of gun violence?
All right. Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm just delighted to be a part of this. I love what y'all are doing at the King Center. And I fell in love with Jesus in the Bible Belt. And yet I began to see the contradictions in the church. I grew up in white evangelicalism, and I can remember a few years ago, the Barna Research Group went to every state in the U.S. and asked young non-Christians what they think of when they hear the word Christian. The number one answer was anti-gay, anti-homosexual. Number two was hypocritical. And number three was judgmental. And so the list didn't get much better. And what broke my heart was what didn't even register on the list of what non-Christians think of when they hear the word Christian. And that was love. The thing that Jesus said that we will be known for, but known by our love. So that's why I'm excited about this day. And, at Red Letter Christians, we're trying to live out a version of Christianity that's known for love and justice again. And one of those things that we talk about is what it means to be pro-life. Because I grew up saying I was pro-life, but I only thought of that through the narrow lens of abortion. And I think many folks that say they're pro-life would be more accurate to say they're pro-birth or they're anti-abortion, because once you're out of the womb, they're going to forget about you, So I want to say that I'm pro-life from womb to tomb, that every person is made in the image of God. And that means I care about gun violence, and I care about the death penalty. I care about immigration. I care about Black lives. I care about police shootings, right? So all of this to me is about living into what love requires of us, to love our neighbor as ourselves. And sadly, I want to say that part of why I began to focus on gun violence and the death penalty is on these two issues in particular. White folks, white Christians in particular, have been the obstacle to life. The death penalty has survived, not in spite of Christians, but because of us. 85% of executions are happening in the Bible Belt. The Bible Belt is the death belt. And that breaks my heart as one who worships Jesus, who said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy," right? And then with gun violence, the biggest group of gun owners in America are white evangelical Christians. We own guns at a higher rate than the general population. So I began to wrestle with some of that. I think that when Jesus said, "Love our enemies," it became harder and harder for me to reconcile preparing to kill them, and I thought when Jesus said love our enemies, he means for starters, we shouldn't kill them. We should find alternatives to violence. And so that's why I've been such a passionate person when it comes to gun violence and the death penalty.
Thank you for that, Shane. And I also was excited to have you on today because of your perspective, but also because of how the issues that you're advocating for have directly impacted me. I live at a weird juxtaposition where I know both a victim of gun violence as well as my father committed murder. And ever since I've started advocating, I'm reminded of Brian Stevens' words where he talked about how we are more than the worst thing we have ever created, have ever done and created. And so I'm curious if you can talk about, we know that gun violence and the death penalty are two very polarizing issues within this country. But what does it mean for someone like you to advocate on behalf of these issues, recognizing that no one is a throwaway, right? There is the opportunity to rebuild and restore what they not only done to the community, but also who they are as individuals.
Oh my, yeah, that's right. And I think for me as a Christian, I know probably not everybody leaning in and part of the conversation today is coming out of their faith or especially, my particular version of faith. But as a Christian, one of the most fundamental truths at the heart of our faith is no one is beyond redemption. that this whole story is not about how good we are, but how good God is, even in the midst of our mistakes. And I mean, if we believe that a murderer is beyond redemption, we could rip out half the Bible. Moses killed a man in the book of Exodus. David, who I learned in Sunday school was a man after God's own heart, maybe on good days, but he raped Bathsheba and had her husband killed. I mean, he did some terrible things. Saul of Tarsus was a religious extremist that terrorized the early church. And that's why he had such a powerful conversion, from Saul to Paul, writes half the New Testament. But this whole story is about redemption. It's a love story. And so, I think that's why, to me, the gun violence and the death penalty are not just political issues. They are a spiritual crisis that surface some of the real holes in our theology, right? How can we worship Jesus, who said, I didn't come for the healthy, but I came for the sick. I didn't come for the righteous, but for the sinners. And then we're going to support the death penalty? Like, that's what I think began to turn me off. And so many other folks looking in on Christianity see those contradictions. There's a thing I carry around with me. One of my pastor friends gave me this, and he said, this is one of the top selling Bible cases in the entire country. And I'm like, all right, looks just like the one I had in high school, and he says, but hold on, you open it up and it is a concealed carry case for a gun. I mean, this is actually for sale, one of the top. And so, like, when we talk about this stuff, to me, it's not exaggerating to call this idolatry, right? When we begin to trust in chariots and horses or in our Glock instead of in Christ. So I think these raise some really important questions to us. And, when it comes to race too, we can't separate these conversations from our history of racism and racial terror in America. It's hard to imagine America without guns. And when it comes to the death penalty, this is the terrible legacy and evolution of racial terror. I mean, where lynchings were happening 100 years ago is precisely where executions are happening today. The same states that held on to slavery the longest are the same ones that are trying to hold on to the death penalty. So it is a theological and spiritual, but also a moral and racial crisis.
Wow. You don't need me to tell you this, but you are dynamic. I'm over here testifying in my little virtual blue box here. You are absolutely dynamic. And I want to pick your brain about something real quick, if I can. You described the Bible Belt as the death belt. Why is it? And you and I think we share a background in theology and philosophy, and so we're thinkers. Why do you think that, for as much as this is the Bible Belt, that there's this orientation toward death in terms of how we think about punishment? Why is that?
Well, there are, we might have to do a round two on this, but I think there are ways of understanding why Jesus died that can lead to very deadly theology. Like, for instance, there's a version of understanding Jesus's death that said God needed blood. God had a gun pointed at humanity and took it off of us and pointed it at Jesus and killed Jesus. And that creates a God that might be, easy to fear, but really hard to love. And how I understand Jesus's death is very different, right? That Jesus's death is one of the most profound acts of divine solidarity that the world has ever seen. God left all the comfort of heaven and was born into a brown-skinned Palestinian Jewish refugee body on earth that lived in the margins, joined those who are suffering even unto death, when he is executed by the empire that he lived in, right? He was hung on a cross, which was the most horrific, humiliating form of a public service announcement, as James Cone says. James Cone said it's saying, like, if you claim to be king, this will happen to you. So they hung him on the cross. But what I think happened, on the cross is Jesus absorbed all the violence of the world in order to put it on display, but to subvert it with love, right? So we're talking about love today. And I think what Jesus did on the cross is show us the violence, the hatred that we are capable of, and show us what God looks like in the face of all that, even to the point of saying, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing, as he is being killed. So that beautiful manifestation of love, that's what I follow. That's the heart of my faith and my theology.
Wow, and that rendering you just gave is absolutely just I don't even have any words. You have set the virtual stage on fire in a good way. So so thank you, sir, for your energy. Thank you for the light that you bring, and what you've done is just encapsulated what redemptive love is. That's the redemptive side of it, right? So thank you again. I don't have nothing else to say. I'm a, as they say in Congress, the gentle lady from North Carolina yields. I'm a yield to Jamira. Thank you.
I thought we were going to pass the collection plate around at one point. So I definitely appreciate that conversation. And I think it's right on time, because so many people are questioning how their view of the world is in conflict with their religion. And I really appreciate Shane helping to really lay the foundation for that discussion.